Hey, good morning, everybody.
Hey, there you go. Oh
Well,
man, look at this, hey?
welcome to a very special, unique edition of Flooring by the Numbers Live. Um, so, so pretty excited today. Grant Petruzelli is joining us. He's our first ever guest, and
So I was already a little nervous, but then that countdown, oh my goodness, my heart's racing right now.
Well, before the countdown, your hair was all messed up, and during that period, you've had your hair
my glam
done.
squads swing by.
That's right. You've got all of the stuff going there. I love it. It's fantastic. Okay. All right.
This is exciting, Nick. I mean, our first guest. You think about it after Grant's appearance. If we ever get a guest after that, then it's probably one danger money for appearing on this show. I mean. But I'm very excited about it.
Well, one of the challenges is that you and I talk so much, I don't even know whether Grant's going to get a word or two in today.
I'll shut up, I promise.
You say that. I know you. All right. Well, look, let me give you a little bit of an intro. Many of you will know Grant. He's the president of a very successful flooring dealership that's prospering on the West Coast, Universal Metro Incorporated. The other beautiful thing about Grant is that he is a leader. He is a student of his profession. He does give back to the industry. He's very, very active in the StarNet community. A couple of things. He's on the advisory council at StarNet. He's also the co-chair of the Business Development and Specifier Committee. I had to make sure that I practiced
Business Development and Specifier. I mean,
that is a lot of big words. Very important committee. And get this, he was voted one of the emerging leaders by Floor Focus magazine. So he comes with a huge amount of credibility. So we're going to take a lot of fun to grill him and make him feel a little uncomfortable on the show.
I dig it. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. You guys have been a treat to work with in the past few years, and definitely have helped us elevate our business. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be with you guys today.
Fantastic. So well, we're looking forward to it. So for those people, well, even for the people that do know you, you're a third generation flooring person. So you know the industry, you know the ins and outs. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. How who is Grant Petruzelli? How did he get into flooring?
So it's one of those things where I didn't have the honor of getting to know my grandfather. He actually passed away in 1976, years before I was born. My dad was 18 at the time, was a freshman in college. And his dad, who was a lifetime career salesperson on the carpet manufacturing side of the business, had just started a residential flooring shop. And after his dad passed away suddenly, he wrapped up his semester and really bootstrapped that business for the past 40 years, and he's made it a success. And so for me, growing up in the industry, I spent a lot of times climbing on carpet rolls and learning how to drive on a forklift and all the fun things that come with the family business, being flooring. And really kind of learned that, the need to work hard and what it meant to get dirty a little bit. So after going to the university, I went to Arizona State University and had absolutely no aspiration to get into the flooring business. Was working for the Angels baseball organization, and went with them on their 2002 run of the World Series. And if you ever look at the panoramic picture of the Angels after they won, I'm behind short tackling a guy and putting handcuffs on him. And went back to ASU and was managing their spring training facility. Did a stint in Washington, D.C., where I was working on Capitol Hill. So did all these amazing experiences. And when I came back to California after I graduated, my dad put an opportunity in front of me that was too difficult to pass up, just based on the lifestyle I was accustomed to, the flexibility it provided, the opportunity to raise a family, et cetera. So got in the business that way. For about 8 to 9 years, I managed his different flooring operations. We had up to 3 stores at one point, and very residentially oriented. And then in 2013, I started a conversation with Dave Tripke at Universal Metro, and was basically recommended by two different friends of his. And after a couple months of kind of talking through that, found an opportunity to move into the commercial marketplace and start developing healthcare market segment once more for Universal Metro. So the rest, as they say, has been history. But yeah, I've been able to get involved with StarNet and some other things outside of just Universal Metro. It's been a great experience.
So Grant, I mean, are you still involved in baseball? I mean, do you what's your connection to baseball today? I mean,
so today I am a first base coach for my son's double A, team here in Little League. I have the opportunity to go to the occasional Angels game and really enjoy it. I have a lot of friends that are still affiliated with the organization. As I was there, kind of as they transitioned from Disney owning the team in Anaheim Sports to Artie Moreno's ownership. And so I got to know a lot of their key staff and key executives. But it's funny, I go to a game and I'm watching the crowd just as much as I'm watching the game, because that's where my head was trying to break up fights and all that good stuff. So it's not quite the same experience, but to look at it through the lens of my son these days makes it that much more appealing. So we still enjoy going to the occasional game and being able to speak into him about what the game's about. It's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Very interesting. Eh? Wow. I didn't know that part of you. I really didn't know that you were involved in baseball to that effect. I know you're a fan, but I didn't realize, that you had some deep roots there. That's great.
Yeah, I joke because I was at Arizona State when they had a pretty stacked squad. And, my friends say, hey, why didn't you play at Arizona State when you had the opportunity? As if I had that ability. But the shortstop who I was sizing up, I was like, yeah, he's got kind of a rag arm, but he ultimately went on to become the MVP multiple times in Dustin Pedroia. Our right fielder was Andre Ethier, who was a star here in LA with the Dodgers. So yeah, my baseball career was going to end pretty abruptly. So it was a good lateral move, as they say, to move to the Angels and start working with the spring training facility in town. It was a lot of fun.
Unreal. Eh? Wow. So Grant, I mean, you really have, you have an impressive resume. I mean, you've really you've been involved in this industry for a long time now. And are you as passionate about it today as what you were maybe right in the beginning? Or, do you feel that, both your own personal prospects and the industry prospects, do you feel they've changed substantially? Or, what a little bit about just some color around that, maybe?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is I am, as someone put it to me, you're an old Gen Xer, a young millennial. I'm kind of right at that cusp of that generational change, right? And I've been around the business for so long that I know a lot about how different products work, how they work together. I know the technical aspects of it, and really grew up in an era where you had to learn more than just what showed up on the first page of a Google search. So, to be a resource for the other team members, that's definitely been an evolution for me, to go from maybe my own self-interest from a salesperson to how I can give back from a leadership perspective. And the real evolution of that has gone, from just the small business retail shop and trying to help Susie Homemaker, to then a commercial experience where I remember the first time I walked into a commercial environment and we had to look at a couple patches in an OR room. And I'm looking around and nothing matches. All the different finishes are different, but they're all servicing, that same purpose. And we go back to the shop and Dave's like, grab one of those rolls, one of those homogeneous sheet vinyls, and we'll be good to go. And I'm like, but they don't match, So to go from this environment where everything had to be pretty and aesthetically pleasing to the eye of the homeowner to it needs to be functional and it needs to serve a purpose within a commercial environment was a big change. And now to find myself, in a position where I can influence some of the pretty stuff that happens in these commercial environments is fun. But really I'm at a point in my career where if I can build a successful team within Universal Metro's ranks and really give back, to the Starnet community and to the other communities that I'm affiliated with, that's the name of the game, because I think that's really the foundation of what we should be doing here just as human beings is the opportunity to build relationships and to pass that knowledge along and to help other people be successful in their craft and their trade. So, I think opportunities like this, are kind of paramount to really elevating yourself and what you're doing.
Fantastic. That's great. And so Grant, tell us a little bit. I know, one of the things that, most owners are concerned about is, winning new business. Have you got any good, what's some of the most innovative things that you've done there at Universal Metro to win new business?
So one of the craziest stories that I have is, years ago, I was still predominantly in a sales role, and we had an opportunity to bid many hospitals that were going to be upgraded from a cosmetic standpoint all at once. And so we kind of honed in on the 6 that were within about 100-mile radius of one another, and the opportunity to just go after those aggressively. And in the middle of this experience, I was doing the job walks myself, saw the size and magnitude of these jobs, which literally were full renovations of each of these hospitals that were fully functioning at the time. And, having to understand the complexity of phasing and the nuances of how we're going to get in and out of the facility, the infection control needs, et cetera. And so I walk each of these projects, and really sizing up the competition was one factor. Getting to know the players that were involved and kind of mapping that account was another factor, especially considering it was a new account for me at the time. And then life happened. My estimator and coordinator at the time, her family experienced some emergency overseas. So her dad was back in Asia, and she was so vested in this opportunity to help, bring this across the finish line, that we devised a plan as she was caretaking. She was still bored, still wanted to work. And so I would literally work all day on these estimates and do these takeoffs and really get in the weeds and try to understand the complexity of this project. And at about 5 or 6 o'clock, this is kind of pre-Zoom, or at least, Zoom mainstream, we jump on Facebook Messenger, or the equivalent back then, and chat by way of that. And she'd pick up the reins and run with them for another, 8 to 10 hours. I wake up early, and she'd do a handoff and tell me what she accomplished. And somehow, some way, we got all these bids done with kind of that 24-hour schedule. And I think our estimators that we kept, conferring with were astounded that we were as far along as we were when we were there. But ultimately, it merited a very successful project that was, 2+ years in the making. And, I'd say the only other fun one that's kind of intriguing in this environment, we did our actual first bid review and scope review via Zoom about January of 2020. So this is pre-pandemic, before COVID was mainstream, et cetera, right? And I remember getting off that meeting, and I'm like, dang, that was so successful. We had an opportunity to really get in the weeds and show them how we did all these different things and what we were considering, really qualifying our bid. And I get on the phone, I call Dave, and I'm like, hey, I have this brilliant idea for how we can grow our business. And it's this thing called Zoom, and it's fantastic. And then everybody else figured it out a month and a half later. So
people had to figure that out real quick, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it's interesting how, this business has evolved, just by way of something like that. And, how you can use technology and try to get an edge. And, really fundamentally what it comes down to is, being comprehensive in your approach, to have the right strategy, to have people that are willing to work alongside you and pull things through. But that's still the name of the game in building your business.
That's great. That's great. And, what have been some of the challenges? What have been some of the challenges that you've wrestled with? And we're going to get into, more the industry challenges. I know you've given that a lot of thought. I like the way you think about that. But from your own personal perspective, what are some of the things that you've been wrestling with over the years?
So I think for me, I'm a big thinker. So to get, into a place where I'm not thinking strategy all the time, and to tactically, get behind something and rally the troops behind that. I joke because I'm part of a peer group of CEOs and other business leaders, and we'll have consultants come in with the latest and greatest idea that they're peddling every couple months or so. And my number two in our office, in Sheila, she's like, man, I hate when you go to those meetings, because you come back and we have a completely new vision, new idea the next day, and it's like, yeah, throw that one out. We're going this way, and it's going to be fantastic. But I think to table some of that sometimes, maybe cherry pick the great things and stay centered in your approach, so you can really deliver on your goals. That's been paramount to our success. Obviously, within the industry, I think the thing that we're wrestling with the most right now, beside consolidation, which is a whole other topic, but just commoditization of product, and this desire for each of our major manufacturers to really drive business by way of price, and predominantly price alone, and that puts everybody in a tight spot, right? So when you're experts in your field, when your clients know that you understand how to do things well, and they value that, but a lot of their ability to make decisions is price derived or budget derived. It really impedes our ability to deliver on our promises. So it requires us to just get better, and to get better at qualifying the overall experience that we're going to provide, and to ingrain that in each of your staff members. That's vital. That it doesn't always have to come down to price. That we can, in fact, make money, and it's okay to make money. That's what we're all here for. But in order to do that, you have to elevate that conversation, and maybe you start at that lower number, and build off of that relative to what you're going to deliver in your promise. But at the end of the day, commoditization is definitely not helping things.
Right. And Andre, you this is a subject that you talked about. In fact, Andre wrote one of our latest blogs, which is, do you feel when you ask for a decent price that you're gouging the customer? The point you made there, Grant, was, it's okay for us to make money. I mean, Andre, you have a perspective on that. Sometimes the salespeople we work with are reticent to charge a fair price, right?
I mean, Mick, first of all, you tell me I can't write anything. Then you said to me, I wrote a blog. I mean, so now I'm bloody really confused. Okay, so
well, now let me explain how it works. Andre is the genius, but he thinks in Boolean logic. You can't actually put that out there. So he tells me things, and then I reinterpret them, write them in English, put them out, and that's his blog. But
it
he needs
is
a little bit
the
of help.
most frustrating experience in the world. So he says, now, what do you mean by that? I said, what do you mean? I've just told you what I mean. That is the most. But I look, I must say, by the time I written something, and by the time Mick's interpreted, at least, I then read it and I say, okay, yeah, all right, this does make sense. But, Grant, so a couple of things. I mean, first of all, you mentioned a few words that were important to me. Number one, you spoke about goals, and I know you guys. I mean, we've worked with you guys, and I know you guys are fairly goal conscious and focused. I mean, your numbers well, right? Okay, you spend a lot of time engineering your numbers with your people, and getting them to understand that, and the consequences of achievement, and the consequences of sort of not achievement. So tell us a little bit about how you would see this year. I mean, do you, as far as goals are concerned, do you see yourself and your organization achieving the goals that they have already, or that you and them? I know you do collaborative goal setting. So how do you see that at the moment?
Yeah, so obviously, I think the biggest uphill battle in this environment is that, I think there's definitely going to be some loss of project volume over the next several months, and that's just logical. I mean, you have to consider a typical project cycle is 12 to 18 months, and if something's in pre-con, before we're even able to see it, Well, with A&D sitting it out, for several months early in the pandemic, and for a lot of these end users to look ahead and try to forecast what's coming, I think there was a lot of people that held back, and so I think that the hardest part is going to be, finding the projects where we can in fact add value, and to identify those projects. Currently, we're hitting our numbers, we're exceeding some numbers. I think the funny part about goals is that there's a certain element of cognitive dissonance where if I make the goal, well then I basically achieved it, right? Because it's there, I put it out there. And the hardest part is to recognize that if your goal from a baseball perspective even is to get at least one hit every 3 at bats. If you go 0 for 3, well, then you didn't achieve your goal. If you went 1 for 4, yeah, you got a hit, but now the ratio is lower, right? And so you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be disciplined about what that goal is. You have to do the work, get up every morning, and know where your focus needs to be. And I think in an environment like this, there is so much negative news that surrounds COVID and what's happening in the economy, et cetera. So it's easy as a salesperson to psych yourself out and to get out of your routine and to throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall, hope something sticks, as opposed to looking at what's worked in the past, what worked even in the middle of a pandemic, and to say, if this is my hit rate, and I put these quality of projects on the board, I should merit this result. But there again, if I look at where I lost my projects, if I look at what projects I didn't pull through, to really kind of get into the weeds a little bit and to figure out the why behind it, right? Because if you're going to continuously do the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a different outcome, we all know what that definition is. Whereas if you look at it as an opportunity to really dive a little bit deeper and to interpret, hey, what went wrong there? Did I come off a little bit too aggressively? Could I package my bid a little bit differently? Could I have reviewed the bid with the customer? All those different things that make an impact, that make a difference. I think that's going to be vital in the next year. And it's just doing those little things that elevate your hit rate, that allow you to take, even a small stride, in elevating that number can just be a matter of focusing on the right things versus on a whole lot of different things.
So you feel fairly good about your goals right now?
I think overall, yeah, I think the challenge for us right now is, and the build up to 2020, we had a lot of new people in our mix. And so 2020 really put a stall on their ability to get in front of the end user, to really develop relationships, et cetera. So I think there's still, a little bit of that here in California, unfortunately, where, we have things beginning to release, the vaccine's helping, the recall effort on Newsom is also helping to stimulate the economy and get everybody back out there so we all forget about it. But I think at the end of the day, those people on our staff still need to get in front of the right people, make some strides with relationships. And I think if they do that as effectively as we want them to, as we're challenging them to, then we should have still the results that we're banking on by the end of the year.
Fantastic.
And did you employ any innovative techniques? I mean, a lot of what I heard from a lot of people was, we're in the relationship business. We haven't been able to get in front of people. Our relationship equity has dwindled, so we haven't been able to be as effective as possible. How did you I mean, you were an early adopter of Zoom. Were you able to kind of overcome some of those challenges of being able to get in front of people?
Yeah, so I think, on one hand, this pandemic was very difficult. I think the upside in it is that we all learned a very innovative way to do business. And, I think the opportunity now to do a bid review, to sit down with a customer and be able to go through where your head was, where their head is, either before that bid deadline or after that bid deadline when you're negotiating the project, has been instrumental in our ability to pull some of these larger projects through, because now we put ourselves in a position to really lay this project out in a way that's going to make the most sense for our general contractor. And what I tell our team all the time is, look, as a subcontractor, we have to look at ourselves almost like a 1099 employee of that particular firm that we're working with, right? And so if we are their employee, we need to service them at a level that they would expect their employees to service them, and so to that end, if I'm an extension of their estimation team in that part of the project, well, then I need to help them sell it, because if I can't, well, they're likely understaffed right now. They likely are straining as a result of everybody else's COVID issues. So what's going to happen if my bid doesn't meet their expectations? They're going to throw that one aside, and they're going to pick up the one that's easiest to interpret, that's most in alignment with how they need to do business, et cetera. So I think using tools like Zoom definitely gives you an ability to share and collaborate ideas. At the same time, just putting it out there, not every call needs to be a Zoom call. You guys are all good-looking people, but at the end of the day, the phone still works really well. And that became exhausting in the middle of the pandemic.
Well, so a couple of observations, Grant. First of all, I think you've taken your history and your love and your affection for a team-based sport like baseball, and think about that in the flooring environment. As you said, with a commodity product, how do you demonstrate a difference? It's about building an experience, and actually having a team collaborate in front of the customer is absolutely fabulous. It's how you're going to differentiate, and you're really leading on that perspective. But secondly, up until recently, and I know it goes on a lot, people don't use the phone, or even Zoom is way beyond them, and people have just been submitting these electronic bids mindlessly. And how do you differentiate if all you're sending is something that's electronic with a price on it? It's just not going to help you achieve the margin. It's not going to help you demonstrate your value. So I love the telephone. A conversation on the telephone beyond what you're sending electronically in email is absolutely paramount. I would encourage people to use that device even more so.
Well, it's funny. I had a mentor at one point that distinguished the differences of how you communicate based on the technology you use. And I was right in my sweet spot. I got my degree in interpersonal communication, organizational communication, rhetoric. So
I knew that's why you're so compelling as a presenter. Okay.
Thank you. But he used to always tell me, look, when you talk on the phone, you need to direct people how you want things to go down. The phone is not really a device where you can interpret what's going on the other end of the line. You can't see somebody's nonverbals, their body language, etc. So it's best just to get down to brass tacks, to direct somebody what's needed or how you're going to do something, and to validate that with active listening. But I think a lot of times, because there's so many different ways to communicate, the perspective is that we communicate the same way regardless of the device that we're using, and that can be further from the truth, right? So if you put yourself in a position to get on the phone with somebody, and to be able to tell them, hey, this is what I plan to do, this is how I'm going to follow up, this is how I'm going to handle this. Well, at the end of the day, I think you're going to have a much better result.
Yeah, a little comment there from Jerry. Good morning, Jerry.
Hey, Jerry, nice to see you. I love
you
what Jerry does. I must say, we've got to give Jerry a plug, hey? Because I mean, guys.
Tell the audience a little bit about Jerry, Andre, because when we're going to have Jerry on a separate show. He's a really interesting character.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, look, I'm sure anybody that's met Jerry is. Grant, have you had an opportunity to talk a little bit with Jerry?
I've not, although we are LinkedIn friends, so I got that going for me. But I can tell you that we use Jerry's services, and we've had a lot of success with those services. So
really, isn't his product fantastic?
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
It really is.
For us, like he's mentioning there, to have professional and consistent documentation. I mean, it's helped us to standardize a process that can be very fragmented throughout an organization. When you're dependent on each person delivering the same quality of product each and every time, their service with Spec Intel definitely elevates that conversation.
All right, very good. Well, we're gonna have Jerry back on the show. So yeah, fantastic there. So Grant, I mean, you talked about a couple of things, in the green room before we came on the show. Do you like that? The green room, very,
makes me nervous.
We got the whole thing going. But you were so eloquent on the ripple effect of the fact, you already mentioned it earlier, the A&D activity dropped, right? So projects, volume dropped, and then this delay and ripple effect. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think the reality is that there was a pretty significant drop in volume. StarNet helped capture a graph here recently that kind of illustrated that the bid volume, or excuse me, not bid volume, but the A&D billable hours are finally at an equitable level that they were pre-pandemic. And that's not to say that they were high by any means prior to the pandemic, just to say that we're kind of back to where we were. So I think when you have such a dramatic dip, ultimately, I think the hard part for any commercial contractor right now is we have kind of compound issues. One, from a bidding process and building a backlog that way. We ultimately have fewer projects to bid right now. And the projects that we are bidding are resurrecting themselves time and time again, and they're rebids or modifications of prior bids, maybe even resurrected bids from around the beginning of the pandemic. So now we're looking at something through, again, another set of eyes, trying to identify what's changed, et cetera. And then all the while, you have all this work that was in your work in progress that got delayed. And now we're in a position where a lot of that's finally releasing, not as much as I'd like. But you have, in some organizations where you have kind of a soup to nuts model, as we often do, you have your same salespeople that are trying to go drive new business and solicit new business are in the weeds managing work that's already in your whip. And so it's kind of a compound problem. And, I think there's also just an element of anxiety that comes with, hey, I've already looked at these plans like 3 or 4 times over. So when you have a bid that kind of resurrects itself, there's a couple things that happen, I think, just psychologically. One, you either feel like you got it in the bag, because hey, I've looked at this before, and that's where mistakes can sometimes be made. I think there's the risk that you lose interest because you've seen it so many times, and it's like, how many other competitors are also seeing the same thing? So, I think it's that much more important to really get a pulse on where you stand on your last bid, what needs to change in order to make you as competitive as possible, how you can qualify that new bid and really help get yourself in a position to close things out. And all the while, I think the elephant in the room is the fact that we're dealing with projects that are, realistically, at least 12 months old. But oftentimes, if you add the pre-construction life cycle prior to that, these projects were probably budgeted originally in 2018, 2019. And so what's the expectation by, that end user to believe that, hey, do we have a project that we can actually pull across the finish line at the same budget that we started at? And we're just talking flooring. I mean, if we're focused on flooring, we're talking about 3 to 5% inflation year over year, the price increases that we just incurred because of raw material issues, the tariff factor, all these different things. So if I have a job that was, let's say, just hypothetically, $1 a square foot when it was originally budgeted, why? Because a lot of the sales reps are in this commoditized environment. Yeah, I got $1 a square foot material. Here's my option. I'm gonna throw it on the table, and it's pretty, it looks good. It'll fit the bill from a design perspective. Not considering the fact that the job actually may go 18 months later, or God forbid we have a COVID type circumstance 3 years later, Now I have a product that instead of being $1, now costs $1.30, $1.45, somewhere in that range. And if that's not factored into that initial price, then all it's doing is dissuading that end user from moving forward, figuring out where they can value engineer this project. And we're in an environment where steel's through the roof, lumber's through the roof, all these other raw materials and building materials are through the roof. So what's going to happen? Those jobs are immediately going to get nitpicked and value engineered one way or the other. Ideally, in our environment, we're partnered with a lot of startup partners, a lot of long-standing partners that we've worked with for many, many years. At the end of the day, we want to bring those opportunities back to those same manufacturers and suppliers. But I think there's a perception oftentimes that it's a value and a margin play, when in fact this is where we need to be. This whole conversation should have started with, what's the economy of scale of this project? When's it realistically going to go? And to that end, we could back into a budget. So if we would have started with $1.50, hey, everybody's good. You can get your number. I'm still below budget, and we're all doing what we need to do. But instead, now we're grasping for dollars that just really aren't there.
Yeah, and you got a fan there, Grant. Summer Brattain over at DCO runs their pre-construction business, and having that level of foresight and thinking in the bid process is critical. And as you said, if you can get in earlier and get them to be thinking about what's the outcome rather than just coming up with a price, because your value add is you're doing that thinking on behalf of them, because they probably don't have the talent. They've got a lot of young people in there, and you've got to be the thought leader in shaping their thinking.
And I think, realistically, what's happening a lot in the manufacturer side of things is they're growing, they're consolidating their businesses, and with that comes a lot of movement in your vendor relationships. So someone that's your partner one day, just by way of the business card they're handing out, can radically change, if they decided to take a lateral move. And the reality is that a lot of them, when they make that move, are on an 18-month guarantee. And so when you have that dynamic, they are promised a wage for the next 18 months to go drive business, to grow market share. And with that comes low margin, pricing that's put out in the marketplace. And then when they finally get to a place where those jobs get pulled through, it's like, uh-oh, now I'm on my commission structure, and that number I gave you is not a number I want to honor that diligently. And I think realistically for us, as kind of the broker of sorts of the product, because we don't manufacture anything, we definitely execute on it. We understand what those dynamics are, and to have a commercial contractor involved in that budgetary process as a vendor, as a manufacturer, to get some feedback, we're able to add some value in that exchange. We went to an A&D presentation just before the pandemic started, and we're there with one of our partners. She throws down some new fancy product, and the first person that walks by looks at the LVT and says, "Hey, what do you think that's going to cost?" And at first she's about to answer it. She stops and she goes, "Grant, what do you think? Could you be at like $250 a square foot on that?" And I'm like, "Where's it going?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" And I go, "Well, where's it going to be used?" And she goes, "Oh, it's going to throw it in a break room." And I was like, "So what are we talking about? Like 50 to 100 square feet tops?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's about right." And I'm like, installed, it could be $8 to $10 a square foot. Because I'm looking at it from the standpoint of the material, the install, the rubber base, the prep, all the different factors, the moisture testing that might need to be done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in order to facilitate that installation. My vendor rep is looking at it singularly through the lens of that one product, without adhesive, without rubber base, without any of those other things, and has no idea what the economy of scale is going to be. Just assumes that it's going to be 50,000 square feet of LVT when it was constrained to, maybe 2 to 3 boxes and the overage that's going to be required. So obviously that cost per square foot is going to go through the roof, and it's just a totally different conversation.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So Grant, Oh, sorry, Mick. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Andre.
I mean, one of the things that okay, so I think we really are changing the whole. Mick had a script for the show. I wish you could tell everybody your script, and then if you had a look at the script and then look at the reality, I mean, anyway.
It's a live show, Andre.
But Grant, things that I would be interested in really is, and I've not really spoken much about this, but if you were an owner of a company and you were thinking about succession of some form, and part of your succession plan was, to bring somebody external, because I mean, you are a president, and I know a little bit of the background of your levels of authority and all the rest of it, but making the assumption that an owner wants to think about a succession plan and bring in somebody that is outside the family. All right. So this is point number one, outside the family. I mean, you're not the brother or child of Dave Tripke, right? But so he's taken a fairly unique road, right? First of all, do you need to look for somebody that has already been well entrenched in this industry? In other words, obviously your technical knowledge is very sound, good, whatever word, right? Okay. Do you need to have somebody that is well entrenched in the industry, or would you be looking for somebody that just has good leadership or management skills, or a combination of the both? I mean,
so I think,
what would you be looking for?
I think at the end of the day, first and foremost, whenever you're talking succession, you need to talk about alignment, right? And so it's paramount that the person that wants to evolve into that next chapter of their life is in alignment with where the business is going to go, is helping to cast that vision or sharing that vision with somebody that is an executor of sorts. I think the idea of being either a visionary, an operator, type mentality, it kind of needs to be a combination of both for that person that's getting that torch passed to them. And the best analogy I was ever given, as Dave and I, began working through our succession plan, was, this idea of a relay race. And, when you have a baton in a relay race, the first person that runs around that track is holding that baton, and they don't run up to that next person, stop, hand it to them, and that person starts running from there. What happens? They both are running together, for a certain amount of time. And at one point, that person's got the baton behind them. I'm grabbing hold if I'm taking the reins, and we're holding on together before it's finally released. And it was a great analogy for me. Why? Because it paints a picture of the fact that there has to be that alignment. There has to be those shared goals. And at the end of the day, that's truly how you execute on those things. I think the hardest thing right now in this industry is, the succession planning, it's got to revolve around this idea of embracing the next gen. And a lot of what I'm trying to do at StarNet and in the leadership that I do within StarNet is to really promote that and encourage, this next generation of leaders, to one, step up and make themselves available, make it known, that they want to be part of that plan, but also to empower them with some of the tools that they need to get to that next step, because the reality is, in a consolidation-oriented environment that we find ourselves in, well, if you're going to exit as a business owner, you're either going to look for an equity group or you're going to look for someone to acquire you. And in that case, hopefully you have some barometer of what you want your business to look like, in the years to come. But I think a lot of them may be, focused too much on what they're going to be doing post-retirement, and less about how they're going to help get them there, because it's really a 2, 3, 5 year process in order to get someone empowered enough to take that reins, to think the way that you think, et cetera. So to really get back to your question, does it need to be someone in the flooring industry? I think it helps. I think there's there's definitely a certain level of perspective that I have from being in the fields to doing the different things that I've done, from literally loading out crews for 9 years when I was in the residential business, to being in the trenches with superintendents and project managers and navigating those challenges when they come up. I think some of that will come with time if you bring somebody outside the industry in. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is just to ensure that there's alignment in the goals that you're both setting out to achieve.
And okay, so now that's the perspective from the owner, right? Now, the perspective from, let's call it Grant, right? I mean, there's certain things that you have to have, certain powers, certain certain abilities to run the business the way you need to. The problem is you're not an owner, right? So you got to act as a president in the shadows of an owner, and your ways may not always be exactly in I wouldn't say alignment. Sorry, I didn't mean to say alignment, but wouldn't be the same way that, let's call it the previous owner did things. And, how do you sort of manage that I wouldn't call it conflict, but just those differences?
It's just creative tension. There's obviously some creative tension, right?
Yeah, so I think the reality, whether it's,
what an unbelievable word, creative. No, it's actually 2 words.
So I think for me, one of the biggest things that stood out is, obviously our personalities are different, Dave and mine. And what's ironic about that is when I first took a disc profile, for example, I had a very dominant personality when I first took it. And then when I took it again, maybe it's that rhetoric side of my degree, I confused it and I completely flipped the script. So I was definitely more on his side of things the second year and a half after the fact. And it could have been me just, reading into the questions, kind of knowing where things were going, et cetera. Or the other part of it was that you inherit some of those characteristics and you saw what worked and what didn't. So I think the perception sometimes when you come into a leadership role of any company is that, hey, I'm going to do it my way, and heads are going to roll if things don't go the way I want them to go, et cetera. And then in reality, you have to look at it through the lens of we are in a position to influence a lot of different people that are coming from many different walks of life, and you have an opportunity to speak into those people and to energize them in different ways. And they're not all going to embrace an idea of someone coming in and changing things up, or coming in and doing it their way and asserting their authority, et cetera. So a lot of what Dave and I did initially had almost kind of a good cop, bad cop routine, where if he wanted to be a little bit softer because that was more of his managing style, I could come at it through the lens of, instead of bad cop, more from an accountability lens, where I felt comfortable, where numbers were important, where data was important, and to that end, we could kind of triangulate a conversation a little bit, and we can lean on his ability to speak into people and to boost up their morale, et cetera. And then I could challenge them with goals that, I wasn't going to let slide. And so I think if you're able to play into those strengths of all of your leaders, whether it's, a CEO and a president type relationship, a salesperson and a junior salesperson, et cetera, I think anytime you're sitting at the table, whether it's with a client, whether it's with staff members, et cetera, and you can put yourself on the same side of the table and really leverage the strengths of the different people in the room, that's the best case scenario, right? And I think that plays directly into this.
Because I must say, look, Grant, I mean, you're in a success story. I mean, the way that you and Dave work together, it's beautiful to watch. There's a high degree of trust between the two of you. And Dave's a great leader. I mean, he's a really good leader, and he's sort of managed to really first of all embrace you, and then allow you to be embraced within the organization. So so I think there's certain characteristics. It's very difficult for somebody to really know how to do that. How to have somebody, first of all, I mean, you're not part of the family, so you had to build your own, let's call it your own level of, acceptance and credibility with the people within your organization. And it couldn't come just because you happened to be called president. It had to become because, so first of all, you were you were an incredible salesperson. I think you still do a little bit of selling now and then, but you built your reputation within the organization that way. So by the time you were sort of anointed president, right, people already had that, they had that allegiance towards you. Do you think that's necessary to have in a transition like this? I think knowing how traditional we are, you know what I mean?
It's probably one of the most important things, right? Because I think the one thing that often happens. So if you get back to a sports analogy, which Sheila would make fun of me for if she were here right now, but when you look at like a regime change in head coaches on a football team, right? Oftentimes there is that lull in the wins. There is morale changes, etc. And the reality is that whenever you have a new leader emerge, you are inheriting the ways of old and the people of old. And then there's this outlook that, things are going to be different, on the other side. And that's not, again, it's not a process that happens overnight. And it's realistically, it's not something that should happen overnight. And I think, the role that those people are in and maybe how they're managed might be different. But they're there for a reason, and they've created value to get you to a place where you could emerge to take on a role like that. But I think my outlook for bringing in new blood and some new people and building a team from the ground up. Even to bring in people that have never had any experience in the industry. We're looking for people that are hungry, humble, and smart. And the last person that I hired from our sales team was the last guy that sold me a car. And he was a good car salesperson. I think I gave him more credit for just putting up with me for the several hours that transaction took. But at the end of the day, I saw characteristics in him, and I put myself out there and said, hey, I think you have a good opportunity here and you need to maximize that opportunity here. But this is what I do, and this is what I enjoy doing. It's build a good lifestyle for myself, for my family. You fit a lot of the characteristics that I see in somebody that we want to build a team around. If it's appealing to you, let's talk. And several months later, he sends me a random text message. We grab coffee, and the rest is history. But I think to put yourself in a position as a leader where you can find that certain level of alignment again between how he did things, how I'm doing things is paramount. And then one of the great things that we did too is we created a list of all the different things that we do within our role. And so, at the end of the day, I'm a real big fan of the Pareto principle, this idea that you focus on, the 20% of things that drive 80% of your business, right? But by listing everything that kind of fell under his role versus my role, we could really identify how he could stay in his lane, how I should stay in my lane, and then how I could manage up, influence him, how he could mentor me and influence the things that I was doing. And that really gave us a good benchmark for if he got an email that I wasn't CC'd on, where he could redirect it to me and elevate my authority and my ability to speak into people. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, the only way you're going to build trust in people, comes two ways. In one hand, you need to have integrity. You need to be the same person every time that you're in an environment, regardless of what environment you're in. You need to have that same level of character. But the other part of it is just the time and the investment in people, and them being able to see those characteristics in you. So I think a lot of times when we talk trust, it's rooted in this idea that someone is a good person, that they have integrity, and that they do things the right way. A whole nother side of it is that I've come to you with my problems. You've helped me get through those issues and come out better on the other side. Now I have enough trust in you to bring you another opportunity. And that's the thing that takes the most time.
So Grant, a couple of things that I think are really important. If ever, number one, the idea of transition has to be very active. I mean, I know that you and Dave work really hard in terms of your relationship, the way that you engineer, and it's, you've been doing this for a while. I mean, it's not like, after the first month, well, let you go your way, I'll go and do my way. I'm gonna sit on the beach and everything should be fine. So Dave's put a lot of investment, as you have, in the joint relationship. So I think one thing that is important to me is it's hard work. The transition is hard work.
Yeah.
And people think, well, as long as I've got a I've got a transition plan, I'm good. Well, the plan's just the start. It really is the work between the outgoing and the incoming, and that like, I think, what did you mention? 3 to 5 years is at really the runway that somebody needs to look at if they were truly going to transition in a good way.
I think the opportunity to set some goals, whether they're goals that are easily achievable.
Do you see how Mick changed the I mean, you moved from you, mate. I mean, Mick.
Hey, I've realised once you get talking, I have no other role than to move the screens around. So that's all.
I think the key thing, as you're setting those goals, is to really look at it through the lens of where do we want to be in X amount of years, and to work backwards from there. So from a leadership perspective, from a succession planning perspective, it's vital for me to know, as kind of the executor of that vision, what that vision looks like for you as an owner, and what's your involvement in it. Where are you going? Where do you want to be, et cetera? And if you set a goal that, let's say, is 5 years out, I may look at that from an execution standpoint and with my team and say, I don't need to wait 5 years. Let's do that in 2 years. And then I can set bigger benchmarks for us to accelerate that vision. But then to also have a good enough relationship with the person that you're operating with, to be able to say, like, that's probably not going to happen in 5 years. And if it does, this is what I see we're going to need to do from an investment standpoint, from a people standpoint, a monetary standpoint, acquisition standpoint, et cetera. But I think there needs to be, a certain level of trust, humility, you name it, where the person that's executing on that plan can, in fact, be realistic and share, the challenges that stem from a plan that's a little too ambitious. But at the same time, to put someone in a position that's ambitious enough to go and execute on that, at a much faster clip than maybe was initially anticipated.
Right. So there's one other observation that I've had, Grant, is you built a good team. I mean, when you became the president, I mean, we were sort of more in the earlier stages, and one of the things that was important to you is to build a good team. And we have a client today that has an unbelievable team. I mean, they really are very, very strong. And what I've realized is the unity of that team, the ability for the team to work well together, is really critical to the success of the company. I noticed that's something you did as well. So not only did you come in as a fresh president environment, the first thing that you did was you built a team. And would that be a recommendation, I'm hoping, that you'd have for others that potentially could fall in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think that one of the critical things for us was that we had to elevate the abilities of a whole lot of different people that we're relying on a regular basis. So from a sales team perspective, you have to, remember, I obviously I didn't touch on this today, but in our particular circumstance, I was a salesperson. I was a sales business developer, then a director of sales and marketing. But my day in and day out job was to go and create new business and to manage that business successfully. Dave was largely doing the same thing. And so to take two of our better salespeople out of the mix and to put them in a position where they're working in the business and on the business on a daily basis, we had to make sure that that team that was either elevated and promoted into a position to take over some of those accounts were speaking the same language, that they were focused on the same relationships, that there was alignment in those relationships, because the risk in all of that is that when you have that transition, you're also transitioning those accounts. You have that passing of the torch that's happening in each one of your respective end users or general contractors. And we need to put ourselves in a position when we got those emails, just as we would from an employee that was looking to go to Dave instead of me. When I got those emails from a client, I needed to promote the same message, the same story that my salesperson was gonna respond with, and CCing them and incorporating them in that mix, and not taking the lowest common denominator and grabbing that opportunity because it's high risk and wanting to do it yourself because you can execute on it, but putting your team in a position to pick up those reins and run with it. That's probably among the hardest things that we had to do. And so, for us, the evolution has been, well, there's still some things that Dave and I are pretty good at from a sales perspective. So get us involved and maybe put us in a position to have conversations that are difficult for you as a salesperson to have. And that might be evolving from the tactical side of that transaction, the how do you need this executed, what's your schedule, what's your budget, those types of things, to thank you for this opportunity. Beyond this type of project, where are you concentrating on spending the next 2 or 3 years worth of capital budgets, and really moving that conversation to more of a strategic conversation that's going to help us, not just with that one salesperson that might work directly with that end user, but the 5, 6, 7 different account managers that might serve as general contractors that are all at that facility and working in different ways to ensure that our core values align with their core values, so that when we're speaking to that client, that there's a certain type of message that we're conveying that's consistent. Those are probably the most difficult dynamics when you're building that team.
Very interesting.
That's fascinating, because I think one of the things that we've seen, Andre and I, is the urgency around business development and sales. And having people in the market. So two factors. Number one, people looking, should I be hiring new people? How do I bring them in? Secondly, what could I be doing, as an owner, as a leader, to go into the market? How do I balance my risk across that portfolio? So very challenging. What's your perspective on bringing new salespeople in, Grant?
So it's a mixed bag. You have, on one hand, you could bring in a very qualified salesperson by way of the numbers they claim to have executed on in the past.
How many cars they sold?
Yeah, exactly. So on one hand, you have someone with an established book of business that can add some tremendous firepower right away. It's very similar to growth by way of acquisition, right? We set a benchmark to grow X, and we grew XY because we added this additional extension. That has definitely an appealing element of it, because it's going to add a certain level of firepower, might bring you into a new market segment, might expand your reach with certain vendors or promote additional growth with key vendors. But at the end of the day, there absolutely still has to be a certain level of alignment in that person's personality and how they go about doing business. And all those still have to be framed around your core values, your mission, your vision. On the flip side, if you're If you're doing so from new recruit, so on one hand, we've looked at job fairs, focusing on colleges and universities that actually promote not just business degrees but sales related degrees. And if you're to bring someone like that on, or to always be selling yourself in different networking environments and trying to attract the right people, to learn this industry, it's an evolution. It takes a fair amount of time, right? And so you have to establish the fact that if we're going to invest in this person and really teach them just the core elements of this business, they might know how to do a takeoff and how to look at something on blueprints in a month and a half or so, but it's probably gonna be 18 months until they start to click. And all the while you have to measure, how much money do I want to invest in a person like that to try and bring them up? They are going to get to a place where they're defeated, where they're not moving the needle in terms of sales. They're going to have a different approach where they're probably going to be blanketing the market with a whole lot of bids and try to create some buzz and a name for themselves. And oftentimes that might even mean taking some projects at lower margins than you'd want them to, traditionally, all to get embedded with that account to put themselves in a position to have influence later. All those things, result in additional cost, time, energy, and effort. And from a leadership perspective, you have to be very measured about how much you're going to invest in them. So, I think the companies that are doing it well, doing it right, whether it's in StarNet or otherwise, have established mentorship programs. I think those that promote an opportunity where they can bring a junior person or a sales associate alongside them and train them. There could be some unintended consequences, some different habits that might be ingrained in some of those new salespeople. But I think if they're getting that mentorship from somebody that's established, hey, I know how to do this, I know how to be successful, and then you can drip, your own, level of expertise and mentoring opportunities into them from time to time. From a leadership perspective, if it's done in a collaborative way, you can really have a highly skilled team, but it's probably going to be a 2, 3, 4 year process.
And lastly, Grant, I wanted to. I see a lot of organizations wrestling with this one. And you talked about the fact that you do it there at Universal Metro, and that is, salespeople are kind of like, autonomous. They go out there and they do their thing, and sometimes the first thing you hear about it at the senior level is, we got that bid or we didn't get that bid. And you talked about how you start to shape their thinking. How you, I call it, having a win conference strategy meeting. How we're really going to win this.
So Mick, unfortunately, you're frozen. But I think I know where you're going, so I'll try to pick up the reins here.
Please, yeah, I'm back.
Yeah. So I think for us to get involved and to help promote bigger opportunities, bigger sales opportunities, and to collaborate with those sales teams, the hardest thing I think to ingrain is a lot of the sales process. Obviously, has to do with the urgent and kind of putting out fires and trying to get to that bid and meet that deadline. And so there's a lot of last minute bidding that happens, I think, for a lot of different salespeople. So when you have, other key people that are involved, that process needs to start earlier. It needs to be more regimented in and how do we do a review? How do we get on the same page? Make sure that what we're delivering is a product that not just you're proud of, but that we as leaders or as an organization are proud of. And that's often going to involve some conferencing with that client to get a feel for how they want things executed, et cetera. I think that's probably the most difficult thing from a tactical perspective, is to get people disciplined enough to layer a bid from a scheduling perspective where different people can put eyes on it, speak into it, influence it, so that the final product is something we're all proud of. But I think the key ingredient, for a lot of these opportunities is, as a leader, as a president, CEO, actually going on calls with your junior people, with account managers, et cetera. As I mentioned earlier, you're speaking typically a little bit different language because you're looking at the overall landscape. You're not just looking at, what's my sales budget, what's my goal, and to ask some harder hitting questions. I can't tell you how many times I'll go out in the field with one of our salespeople and the opportunities that emerge from that, right? Where my salesperson is very focused on the urgent, the short-term needs of that client. Whereas I'm looking at, hey, I noticed your whiteboard over there. You got a few different projects that are noted. What's that? Can we help you budget that? Can we get in, earlier in the process, knowing that the earlier that I get in, the more that I get involved early, I can help to influence what vendors might be involved in that project. I can help them budget a number that they can carry, not just in the short-term bid process, but that we can actually execute on when we're going to do the work. And so I'm looking at this through the lens of, how can we help that client with some of those bigger lifts so that we're embedded in that project from the beginning. And that's proven to be, a tremendous success for us where, we've doubled our hit rate, quote unquote. We're more than double our hit rate when Dave or myself are involved in a project versus when our salespeople are going at it alone. And it's just having a little bit more comprehensive outlook on how things are done, how we're going to execute on it, et cetera. And largely it just stems from looking at the bigger picture and how we can fit into that. And let's face it, if you have an owner operator or a key influencer who's also responsible for the budget as part of that decision making, well, we're also going to look at it through the lens of, well, if we do that, I'm going to need additional storage space. I may need additional resources, new equipment. Hey, if we do that acquisition that we're talking about or considering, how could that better our margins? How could that help escalate our opportunity to pull this across the finish line? And all the while, we can potentially drive our margins higher. That's all part of that mix. Whereas a salesperson, you're mostly focused on, making sure that you're able to help that client in the immediate time frame.
Hey Grant, if there was just one nugget that people could take away, that was absolutely fabulous. I mean, what I heard was that when the leaders are involved in your organization, your hit rate doubles. The reason it doubles is because you take a more strategic perspective. The second takeaway I heard was you're very near and dear to your own philosophy of developing people, and that you're a servant leader. Is that when you do go out on those opportunities, and you've got to be judicious with your time, you're growing the capability of those salespeople to think bigger and ask better questions. So for all of you leaders out there, go out on some sales calls, with your people and see what they're saying and help them, expand those opportunities, because you'll look at it from a totally, different lens. Fantastic, Grant.
Well, it actually reminds me, I don't know if many of the viewers know that you had the ambition to climb Mount Everest. And, as you know firsthand, a servant leader, oftentimes is painted in one lens. And the best lens that I was ever given as it relates to servant leadership is this idea of being a Sherpa. And a Sherpa, on one hand, stems from where people, are from, et cetera, but also in the context of Mount Everest. What happens with a Sherpa? The Sherpa takes the necessary steps to climb that mountain at each stage of that ascent, and puts down the foundation. They put the ladders in place to get across these huge chasms, et cetera. They climb back down those ladders. They go retrieve the people that are looking for that Instagram moment at the top. And yet those Sherpa have climbed that thing, whatever it is, 5, 10, 15 times over the course of their lifetime. But when they do it, they go up, they come back down, and, you acclimate your body to take that next stage, and they do it again, and they do it again. So realistically, they probably do it 3-4 times that quantity of time, and they have very few Instagram pictures to prove it. So I think as a servant leader, it's a calling for each of us, to lay that foundation, and to put the stage, and set the tone for our salespeople, to show them how that things need to be executed, and then to encourage them when they're at that ladder and they're terrified to take that next step. That, hey, I did it this morning. I set the stage for you. You can do it. I'm gonna help you get there, and not to put themselves in a position to try and do it for them, because that's ultimately going to promote some studly people like you, Mick. And
it's a great analogy. In the little group mine that went up to Everest, 14 of the Sherpas had hit the summit 14 times. They'd done it so many times before. So what a great
your Sherpa carried you on his back, most probably.
I was a little lighter then, Andre. I was a little lighter. Well, look, we're an hour and a quarter into our hour-long show. It's just been so marvelous to hear your perspective on the industry, your perspective on leadership, succession planning. We got some real nuggets. I'm going to write some show notes, and we'll get those out there. Grant, how can people connect with you?
I think the best opportunity is probably just via LinkedIn. My name's a little hard to spell, but 2 Z's, 2 L's, Petruzelli. And or if they want to reach out directly to me via email, I can be reached at Grant, Grant, @universalmetro.com. And I'm accustomed to helping other people in the industry solve problems, and so by all means, if you want an extra set of eyes on something or want some perspective, I'd be happy to lend a hand.
Thank you. Any closing comments, Andre?
No, I mean, you can't top Grant, hey? So, I thank you very much, Grant. I really, very, very great. I mean, there's so many different things. We got to have Grant on the show again for different reasons.
We do, because we had to
reduce the amount of baseball and increase the amount.
We should follow the script next time. It'll be great.
yeah. We've got an entire script here that we didn't follow that we could use for the next show.
Well, guys, it's been a great experience. I'm just happy to be, on a computer, Zoom call, whatever, without Andre grilling me about numbers. It's been invigorating.
All right, we got Jordan, former car salesman.
Yeah, that's my boy Jordan.
Is that your boy?
That's Jordan. So
okay, thanks, Jordan. Thanks for the comment.
He's a good car salesman. He's a great floor covering salesperson and flooring advisor. So,
okay,
great.
Southern California. Reach out to Jordan.
All the best, guys. Thanks you so much.
Bye bye.
All the best. Cheers, man.